Welcome to Thrive on Mission, the podcast for the Christian Restoration Association. I am Dave Jones, and as always with us is Jim Book, Associate Director with the CRA. And Jim, you have been around the world and back since the last time we talked.
Yeah, Dave, it's been a great trip, a lot of great trips representing the CRA. Had a great weekend retreat with the elders at Kent Christian Church in Madison. And our good friend Brian Schultz and those elders are preparing to move the church into another level that they've never seen before, but the momentum's there, that they're growing, and they just really feel, and it's more externally focused. I don't know that you're going to find a more internally focused church than they are with the studies and the intentionality they have about discipling their members, but they really feel like, you know what, we're the best kept secret in Madison, Indiana. Let's get the word out. And so they've got some great concepts. I was with Kenny Zug over there at Mount Olive Church of Christ, right outside of Hillsboro. And Sunday they had what they call Impact Sunday. And he said, Jim, we had one parking spot open at the church. Now that's the good news. Bad news, there's only 4 parking spots to begin with. No, just kidding. It's a huge, huge turnout. And they had a big fellowship dinner. And we met with all of their leaders, packed into a conference room. And we started casting a vision for how God could take this church and really just kind of help them understand what externally focused looks like. They're getting the information to start the membership class. Presently, they don't do a membership class, or as Jeff called it, a connect class, but they said, we got visitors coming. And I say, hey, visitors will say visitors as long as they feel comfortable doing that, but it's time to move them from visitor to member. And so Kenny, next day, he's on the phone with me. Give me that number to Jeff. I want to get their first steps class information. I think they want to roll that out. So yeah, some exciting things happening around the country with Mission 120. Our good friend Aaron Davis over in Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, 5 baptisms since January, and they're doing great. CJ Epperson, I think's had close to 10. And, so yeah, I'm not saying Mission 120 is what's moved the needle, but I think the idea of growth and development it's kind of helped galvanize us and reminded us, and we're hearing all these great stories. And here's what I'm learning. No church is off limits for God's blessing. I don't care how depressed the area you're in. I don't care what the history of your church is. I don't care how many preachers you've fired over the last 30 years. Doesn't matter. That's yesterday's news. No church that wants to do God's will and wants to grow the Acts model way can't. You can't. And nobody wants to bless the church more than God. Okay, so if you think you want it blessed, I got news for you. God wants to bless your church more than you do. So
Amen.
No church is off limits for growth and maturity and development.
Well, and Jim, what I think Mission 120 has done for a lot of churches is just help frame a destination, where we're headed, where we're going, what we want to accomplish through the Lord's help. Of course, here at Millwood, what we've done is we don't so much promote the idea of getting 120 baptisms, though we certainly want that. We want to make sure people understand that it's not just about getting wet, it's about being a disciple, being a follower of Jesus Christ. So however we frame it, we have to have a direction of where we're going. Hey, by the way, you've been a lot of places, Jim. Any of those guys you want to give the game ball to this week?
You know what? I tell you, after spending a weekend with Kenny and his family, a lot of churches are familiar with the Zugs because they play at Hillsboro and they're Delmarva, the Tri-State. So I get to share the platform with them throughout the year. And whenever I see their name on the list of musicians, I know, okay, preaching may stop where music's going to be great. But I would love to give old Kenny Zugga the game ball for this week because he's been at Mount Olive doing a great job. He and his family. And I couldn't think of anybody better than to hand that one off to this week.
Well, Jim, it's a hard act to follow when the Zugs have played music before you.
Yeah, listen, I tell you, we could just listen to them all day and be filled. Yeah. So you're right. What
inspiring, and Kenny leads so well in that realm, but a lot of people don't know he preaches week to week, and he's doing a great job leading in that community. So I'm really grateful and excited to do that. And he's on board with that mission. And Jim, I want to revisit in this episode something that you and I talked about very early on when we started doing this podcast. In our first episode, we talked about vision and vision casting. That was before Mission 120 was launched. And what I'm hearing back from some of the preachers that I'm talking to is they would like a little bit of guidance on helping to establish how to communicate that vision, not just to the church from the pulpit on a Sunday morning, but really in the meeting room with the elders and with others in the church. Sort of. So I just think this episode might be helpful in guiding these guys, all of us really, in establishing and casting the vision for Mission 120 and in other areas of ministry. So, what are some thoughts you have on how to guide guys in that way?
I've always believed you start with finding out who's in your city. I think the DNA of your town should drive your vision. I really do. And you say, well, everybody needs the gospel. I know that. But I think, yeah, look, there's no question that Paul's conversation in Athens, okay, looked a lot different than his conversation at Ephesus or even in Thessalonica or Philippi. It did. I mean, you're dealing with sinners. I get that. But the audience was different in Athens, and the DNA was different in that town. And he adjusted his conversation, his approach, but all obviously eventually pointed to Jesus. So I'm a huge believer in finding out the DNA of your community. And I just, when we were at Winter Park, it was more of an affluent town. So I demanded a raise every year for my elders. No, just kidding. So, it was an affluent community. So I knew, and it was funny because people would say, I mean, I'll just tell you the truth. My elders were, Jim, that Mercury Topaz you're driving around, could you, and it was fading on top. They go, can you get a paint job on that thing? And I laughed when I went home. I said, Jeanette, the elders are embarrassed. Their preachers drive around in a Mercury Topaz. And Jeanette and I had our first baby. It was hand to mouth there for the first couple of years. And then they got so tired of me driving around that clunker. When we came up for, our annual pay raise, they gave me an allowance to go lease a car. And they never took that from me. So preachers, that's how you get a raise. Just look as poor as you can. No, just kidding. Again, the DNA of the city was a little different, and I don't think that had any effect on our growth. Whether I had a, but I mean, it's funny because if you're in a rural town, a farming town, and your pickup's got dents in it, your pickup as a preacher looks like everybody else's comes to church. So again, DNA. And by the way, Dave, I got a text from a preacher in eastern to Kentucky, Matt Coughlin, great guy, preaches at a church out there, trained by Derek, but they're getting ready to start a campus ministry out there near them. It's a university, but he said, I listened to the podcast and its whole idea of go where God sends you, grow where you're going, go where you grow, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what he's doing. But, Kissimmee got there, 1,500 language groups. I was like, okay, I don't know French Creole, I don't know Spanish, but we got to get a preacher of the gospel here who does. And so the DNA drove that. So I just am a huge believer in finding out who's in your town and reaching them. And we talk about Vernon Eldridge, man. He is such a great preacher. Main Street Church of Christ in McConnellsville, Ohio. They empty out their basement once a week, convert it into a pantry, clothing store. And I was there with him doing revivals. And, man, how do you do? We just got the bottom floor, Jim. And on one afternoon, we got people from all over the town coming in, and we're taking care of them. Now, that wouldn't be for every city, but for that town, it's kind of financially depressed, and the church wants to be the lifeline. So again, Vernon, DNA, boom, hit, just that's the key.
Jim, that's a really good point. Do you find a lot of guys out there maybe look at some of the bigger churches or preachers they emulate, and all of a sudden they're trying to morph that vision into their setting as opposed to looking at their setting and developing a vision out of that? Is that a common thing you're seeing?
It is. And I think, preachers, we all want to, some preachers, I think we've gotten past a lot of this, the latest fads come and go. But people's needs never do. Someone said, Jim, if you could preach to hurting people, you'll never lack an audience. That's not a fad. Okay. That's a genuine truth that Jesus modeled for us. And so, yeah, I would say, man, I think people can watch other churches do things and can say, I like how you did it. I've hijacked so many ideas from guys that I thought, man, and so we've used them. But the reality is it's still about people. And it's been said, if you preach to hurting people, you never lack an audience. As I said before, it's the reality of hurting people are everywhere, but their needs may be different. different kind of hurt. We were at Kenny's church, man. We had a bunch of bikers show up on Impact Sunday, and at the leadership meeting, I said, "You got a ton of Christian bikers. They're all Christian bikers, all kinds of." I said, "Is anybody here own a motorcycle?" And they're like, "Yeah, one of our guys, and he's actually in that club." I said, "That's all I need to hear." Okay, because if I had that many motorcycle riders come into my church building, I would have said, "All right, after who owns a motorcycle? Good, you get in that club, and you become the mole, and you get bring this group over every Sunday." So they do actually, but again, we didn't have a bunch of bikers come to our church at Winter Park. We didn't, so we didn't start a bike ministry. But
Yeah.
man, I know churches where it is. Well, okay, then develop a biker ministry and reach that audience because they need Jesus too.
Jim, besides the DNA of your community, how does the DNA of your church impact your vision? For example, maybe your church is more traditional in song. You've got an older congregation
Yeah.
versus a church with younger families and more modern music. How does the DNA of your congregation affect your vision casting?
That's a great question. So 2 weeks ago, I was in a church in Virginia, mostly made up of seniors. Um, it was like going back in time, which was fine. We sung out of the hymn book. The pianist was great. It was all hymns. Um, Preacher read an entire chapter from the Bible. A lot of times, we read a verse that's covering it. It was a great service. And so we were in the fellowship hall having a meal afterwards. And the preacher's like, Jim, I, hope you don't think wrong of me, but I think we're going to make our focus senior adults in this church. And I wanted to stand up and applaud him. I was like, thank you for, first of all, seeing the obvious. Number two, thank you for being intentional about church growth. And thank you for going after the low hanging fruit because right now, based on your audience, probably I told him, I said, if I had a family of young children, this probably would be the church I wanted to go to because you really don't have anything that's going to help nurture them. Okay, that's fine. But now let's be aggressive. So we're going to be communicating with him, helping develop a card. You're going to have older people on the card, and he's going to advertise the old-fashioned hymns are sung here. We're a loving congregation where the Bible is preached, where the old-fashioned hymns are sung. I got news for you. That's who's going to come to that church anyway, but you got to go get them. But don't put something on that card that you're not, because then again, I think that's false advertisement, one thing. But if that's your niche audience, if that's the DNA of your community, that's the DNA of your church. Old people need Jesus too. And I got news for
Amen.
you. People are living older now than before. You get a 75-year-old guy in your church, you're liable to have him for 25 plus years now. So I really wanted to applaud him because years ago, I think we would have marginalized him. No, no, no. You got to reach everybody. Well, you want to, and who knows, over time, as the church grows, grandchildren will start coming because a lot of grandparents have their grandkids a lot more. And then from that critical mass, you can grow your children's program. One of my all-time friends is William Gasfield, preaches to about 800 to 1,000 people every Sunday in the villages. If you know the villages in Florida,
Butch. Yeah,
55 and older.
Butch.
Butch Gasfield. They don't have a youth program. They don't have a children's program. Now he wants to start one, but he's like, look, this is my audience right now. And I was like, great. And even their songs, they have like an orchestra. It's geared to that audience, and he's reaching them. Again, it's the DNA of the audience community now reaching the DNA of the church, and that's I just really applaud that thinking.
Jim, that's a really interesting point. For a lot of preachers, that's not an exciting option. They
Right.
want young families. They want to be vibrant. They want a youth minister and a staff that can direct all of that. They want to develop a youth program. So, like, if we just hire a youth minister, we will have a youth program. And so they almost set this guy up for failure
Right.
because they don't have much that'll attract to those families yet.
Right.
But let me add this as well. We can't rely upon the older generation, your age, my age, and older, for the future of the church. We have an expiration date, to put it bluntly.
Correct. Correct.
So we do need young families. Let me just tell a quick Millwood story that I think hopefully will inspire some of the other preachers out there. 40 or 50 years ago, Millwood was a small country church that had primarily older individuals. And we had an elder at that time named Forrest Davidson, and Forrest has been gone for 30 years now. But he prayed 40 and 50 years ago that God would send young families to Millwood. He didn't live long enough to see what happened. But today we are the answer to Forrest's prayer.
Yeah, that's
And I
great.
tell that story as often as I can to our church to remind them that we've got to always be thinking about the future of the church. And we can't be content with our tradition and who we are. But at the same time, we can't change who we are right now. We just
Right.
have to be prepared for that future. And so I hope that kind of concept of praying for the future reminds us that what we're doing today isn't the end all. So, Jim, when we have this idea then of who our community is and who we are as a church, we've got preachers out there that are dying to grow. They want to see people baptized into Christ. They want to reach their community. They're running in the 70s, maybe 100, and they want to get to that 120. How should they frame this idea of Mission 120 when they're communicating first to their core leadership and the elders in the church? How do they get them on board first?
Okay, so I use the saying, and it's been around before. Show me your vision, I'll show you your future. Vision of a church sets the tone for the future. No vision, your church has no future. Bad vision, again, no future. But a biblically sound vision will create a solid future. So what we did with Mission 120 is we kind of started off broad and worked our way in. So the first thing we're encouraging churches to do is develop something that every member can be engaged in, whether they've been a Christian for 6 minutes or 60 years. And Dave, one thing I've noticed about a lot of churches is they don't have something as simple as this, an invite card, something with the church information. It can be stock photos or pictures of people, and on the back, pertinent information, QR code. So when you're at a gas station or you're leaving a restaurant, you can actually give something to the waitress, give something to the mechanic, give the whoever does your yard, just give them something to so that they're looking at, and it's a seed planting, and it's all you're doing. So we start off broad. I don't care who you are at the church. I don't care how little knowledge you have or as much knowledge. If you love people, you love the Lord, plant the seed. And then we work our way in. All right, now the evangelist. Okay, primarily job of the evangelist is he's preaching. He's the face. So he knows who's coming. He knows he gets all the guest cards on his desk every Monday. All right, now we go after them. Hey, we offer a Connect class once a month. I'd love to sign you up. If you don't want to meet at Connect class because your work schedule is crazy, hey, let's grab lunch. I met more people at Starbucks and led more people to Christ over coffee than even at First Steps. Point is, the evangelist, point of contact. Now they're out of the baptistry. Everybody's excited. That's where the elders jump in. The shepherds are there to love them. An elder, I'm going to be your shepherd. I'm going to be the one to encourage you. If you have a problem, call me. If there's a situation you pray for, I'm the one who will shepherd you. So now we've got the entire church involved in growth. As it stands right now and has been for years, it's the preacher. His job is to grow the church. And even the elders have said, well, that's why we hired the preacher. And the members are like, you grow it. Our job is to come to consume the information. You preacher, you got the magic bullet, you grow the church. And that mentality has got to stop. And that's one thing about Mission 120 I love. It really includes everybody. Everybody's in on church growth now, but they all have their part to play in.
Jim, you've mentioned that a few times over these episodes, the importance of the elders shepherding these new Christians, keeping in mind it's a lot easier to keep somebody than it is to win somebody brand new.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but what I've found in a lot of churches is that the elders aren't necessarily on board with the job that God has given them.
Yeah.
How would you advise the preacher to, first of all, call the elders to a higher responsibility in their role? And then secondly, what do you do if the elders aren't quite on board and aren't necessarily willing or doing that job?
And I know, so we had that question come up at a church I was at. And I said, okay, I'm just going to tell you right now, if you got people coming out of the baptistry and there's not someone there and I use the word hand them a towel and dry them off, not literally, then I would go into the church and find those godly men and women in your church who will be there, and Priscilla and Aquila kind of people and say, I want you to know my wife and I, we're gonna pray for you every day, and can we sit with you during worship and shepherd them without having the title. But good grief, you can love people too. And it's a shame, but there are a lot of churches where some of the flock are more concerned and more in love with the church and the vision of the church and some of the leaders. And this is going to take a lot of years, I think, to overcome. But part of the problem too, David, I think, is I don't know that we've really shared with our elders what we expect of them when they become shepherds. I mean, when you look at most of the meetings, we talk about facilities and budget. I know, and somehow that's got to come up in some conversation, but that seems to dominate our elders meetings. So in Mission 120, one of the things we're asking for every eldership to do is the first thing out of your mouth when you meet is talk about Mission 120. How are we doing on our baptisms? How's our shepherding? Any elders have reports and updates on those new converts? Hey, so and so's been missing for 4 weeks. Bill, I think you're their shepherd. Did you call him? Did you email him? Yes or no? And I don't mean to shame elders. That's not what I want to do at all. But it's like I think we just got to tell them before we talk about the broken toilet or the church van or repainting the foyer. We're going to talk about the sheep. Okay, we're going to talk about evangelism. We're going to talk about church growth, and then we'll get into all that other stuff. So I think it's reprioritizing and reminding them, guys, you're not glorified um, Home Depot employees. You're shepherds. Okay, so we'll talk about fixing the building later. Let's talk about the people of this church, and are they being loved on and shepherded and cared for and taught? And so I think it's just reevaluating roles and reminding everybody what the role is.
Jim, I love that. I love that idea. First of all, really grabbing a hold of people that are in the church that maybe do have that shepherd's heart, men and women. And interestingly enough, especially for women in the church, they're the ones that generally are more loving and caring and guiding. Nurturing is the word I'm looking
Exactly.
for there. And so capitalizing on that for the women that are new Christians or attending the church. I don't know if you're familiar with Lynn Anderson's book, They Smell Like Sheep.
Yes. Yes.
Outstanding book as it relates to the work of the elder. And I love what he says in there. He says, in a lot of our churches, what we do is we look for these guys that quote unquote meet the qualifications. And he says, what we ought to start doing is looking for men that are actually out there shepherding and then
Absolutely.
talk to them about becoming elders and making sure, of course, they meet the qualifications. But we've got to smell like sheep, is his
Yeah.
point. If you're an elder, you've got to smell like sheep. So it's really important to have those people. And whether the elders are doing it, somebody's got to do it.
Yes.
That is
So I'm
vital for these
I'm
people
going
to have
to
people come
a,
alongside.
a, I'm going to a church in a couple of weeks, and they want to meet with the elders. They said, Jim, would you mind if we brought in some young men who have not necessarily aspired for the office, but we think in our minds they could? I said, absolutely. The worst thing that could happen is after the meeting, go, now I know I don't want to be an elder. The best thing that could happen is you've lit a fire in me, nurture me. I want to be your Timothy. I said, you can't go wrong with that. So so start going after the hot prospects, man. I think our older elders need to be more keenly aware. And you said it, Dave. We all have expiration dates. Not everybody wants to be an elder till he dies. And I get it. And we got to give these older men an opportunity to step down gracefully, but know that we've all done our homework and we've raised the new guys and we brought the new
That's good.
guys up.
And in a lot of our churches, the role of deacon is an office that maybe they have responsibilities, maybe they don't. But in a lot of our churches, oftentimes we look to the deacons to be our future elders.
Yeah.
And one thing I've heard that works effectively is having an elder adopt a deacon. And
Yeah.
when he goes on his call, when he goes to the hospital, when he's helping
Ex-
drying somebody off out of the baptistry, he's got that deacon by his side, and he's mentoring him into that role.
right.
That's what discipleship is.
Well, and I hate to say this, but we're making an assumption that the elders are actually calling on their sheep so they can take that young man with them. I hope that's a safe assumption.
No,
Let's
no,
just say it
that's
is. Let's just say it's happening. But
yeah,
jokingly,
it's
I
happening.
say that because we've got elders that really in our church is someone who haven't actually encountered one of their sheep or had a biblically sound conversation in years. And then we wonder why young guys don't aspire to be an elder because they don't want to sit around a table once a month for an hour and a half and talk about whether we need to replace the blades on the lawnmower. I'm like, I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to sit
Yeah.
through that either. You want to talk about loving people and shepherding people and discipling people to heaven? Now you got my attention. Yeah, I'll be there for that meeting.
As it relates to this idea of casting this vision for Mission 120, I think it's important for preachers to identify that even if the elders aren't on board, the church needs to move forward. The church needs to grow. But
Yes.
the challenge is the preacher can't do all of this on his own. And that shepherding and the encouraging, the evangelism, if the elders aren't going to do it, that's not all on the preacher. He needs to find some people in the church that are going to come alongside him, find some partners in that.
Dave, one of my hardest working men in my church was a retired preacher. He was not an elder. And I went to our eldership and I said, guys, this man has got more Bible knowledge and he's got some tread left on those tires. And I said, I'm teaching an adult Sunday school class right now, and I can do that. But it's made up of mostly senior adults. This man is revered and loved. And we were getting ready to go to 2 services. I had to get anyway. Turn it over to him. That class grew 3 times bigger than when I was teaching it. I asked him, "Would you be our young adult, young at heart minister? We have a ton of senior adults here. I just need someone to take them out monthly. I'm 39 years old, 29 at the time. I can do this." But he said, "Jim, I got it." Started young, blew up in a beautiful way. This guy was not an elder, but I mean, I would call him up sometimes and say, "Cliff, I can't make it to the hospital. Jim, I'm on it." And I had other preachers, I'm on it. I had other lay leaders, I'm on it. And so if our elders were good, but if they couldn't make it, these concerned Christian laborers who still had testimony, still had viability and credibility, they came through. I'm like, you don't necessarily need an elder to make every hospital call or love on someone or pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I missed you in church today." Anybody can do that, has a heart and a soul, you know?
Yeah. I've always thought the primary role of an evangelist and an elder is equipping the saints for works of service, that Ephesians 4 model.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in order for them to not only do we need to teach them how to do the work, they just need to do the work. So allowing people to do that. Hey, let me add something here too that I realize we have elders that listen to this podcast, and I want to make it clear that if the evangelist isn't on board, if the evangelist isn't moving forward, if he's not casting vision, if he's not promoting Mission 120, somebody's got to do it. The church has got to grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And God is doing great things around this country, despite those of us that aren't living up to expectations, if you
Correct.
will. Before we wrap up here, what are ways that we can effectively communicate vision to those who are listening to us preach each week?
Okay, that a great question. You can't manufacture excitement. You can't manufacture a desire. Either have it or you don't, and you know what makes you excited. And when you get excited about something, you want the whole world to see it. Nothing will kill growth and vision faster than a preacher who really doesn't care. Look, if growth isn't a priority, then do your church and your elders a favor and resign and say,
Mm.
look, this church needs someone who gives a flip. And so growth, discipleship, development will not happen if, the old saying, if your church is asleep, you may need to wake the preacher up. Okay, guys, preachers, I was one. I know where you are. I did it for a long time. And I truly believe the preacher kind of sets the tone for the excitement, the vision casting, where the ship goes. And most elders actually are looking for the evangelist. Look, you have the education, you're the preacher, you've had the experience. You come, sell it to us, we'll jump on board, but we need you to cast the vision. But man, I'm telling you, preacher, if church growth and development doesn't keep you up at night, you might need to look for a different job.
So, Jim, when communicating that to the church, maybe give us 3 ideas that are essential in casting vision for people. Obviously,
Okay.
you've got enthusiasm. What would 2 and 3 be?
Okay, enthusiasm is one thing, right? If you're excited about it, that'll get you into the room. That'll get you around the table for discussion. Number 2, develop a plan, and when you roll it out, you need to have a step by step. You have to have a goal, okay, a target date, okay, and then you got to have the plan. Okay, so all of that's got to be in a place. The goal, the plan, the target date, because you got to launch it. And I think that's why we've been challenged churches. Don't roll out Mission 120 if you don't have a First Steps class in play. You got to have a place for those visitors, those inquirers to go. And then you got to call for commitment after the class. It can be a 2-week class, a 2-hour, it doesn't matter, but call for commitment. And then that's when the leadership comes in and begins to facilitate them into the overall program. So excitement, a detailed plan, and then keep the plan. I mean, when Kennedy said we're going to get a man on the moon, he told NASA, you've got to keep this in front of the scientist every day. So Mission 120 or whatever plan you have needs to be mentioned frequently. I've even told preachers, if you do Mission 120, I'd have posters all over. I know CJ, our preacher friend in Cynthiana, they signed this, they're doing this beautiful board, Mission 120, and they're having signature, and they're going to put it in the foyer. So when people walk out, they're like, Mission 120, what's all these names? These are people he got baptized. He's just keeping it in front of people. So excitement, details, and then regurgitate the information to the point of nausea, where people are like, if he says Mission 120 again, I'm going to blow up. Let them blow up to remind them we're about growth. We're about growth, Acts model growth. It'll catch on. It'll catch on.
Jim, give us a story here. I know you got plenty of stories, but I want you to think back to when you were a younger preacher and trying to move forward in your ministries, whether it was your dad, maybe a friend, maybe a mentor in the ministry. What are some things that they told you in Casting Vision, or that you learned from them in Casting Vision, that you still incorporate in your ministry today?
I think the one thing that I have always tried to do is develop a life that would be lived after I was gone. You'd have to remember me, but I wanted to leave an imprint on my world to where even after I was gone, the effects of the ministry were lived out. And I think maybe that's one reason why I started Advanced Center for Ministry Training. I really felt like if I can replicate preachers by the dozens and dozens, even when I'm gone, there'll be preachers in pulpits all over the country that are a recipient of my vision. Now that's what I decided. So I would just challenge every preacher, do something that will outlive you. And what better way than to save people? So when you get to heaven, you can go, I remember you. I baptized you in 2021. Now I get to spend eternity with you. I mean, I don't think it gets better than that. So do ministry that outlives you.